I can't even begin to properly express to you how genuinely angry at myself I am for not getting around to reviewing Live Alive sooner, because wow is it an incredible experience. Initially I skipped out on it because it was releasing in the same month as Xenoblade 3, and as a fan of that series, my initial choice was obvious. In hindsight though, and no shade to 3 here despite my feelings towards that game, it's definitely very good in its own right, I really should have picked Live Alive over it. It's an incredibly fun RPG with a whole lot of charm, and it's by far the most unique experience I've ever had with a role-playing game. Honestly, it's kinda crazy I say that though, because this is a remake of a Super Famicom-only game that came out nearly 30 years ago. When you start the game, you have 7 different scenarios you can play through, with each one story-wise being its own smaller, self-contained RPG. You have one set in prehistory, one in the Wild West, the modern day, and so on and so forth. Each one does have their differences in gameplay, but they all share the same grid-based combat system. In battle, everyone has a gauge that signifies when they get their turn, and this fills up for every action you take, which even includes moving around. Instead of having basic attacks and magic attacks, every character has a list of abilities they can use, each with their own specific range and even attack type. Some enemies are weak or strong against certain types of attacks, and will take more or less damage accordingly, and in some cases they'll even have an ability they can counter you with. As you might be able to tell by this point, combat in Live Alive, while very enjoyable, is also pretty simple. There isn't a ton of depth here, and in general, the game is pretty easy most of the time. For some people, this might be a problem, but personally, I think it works in the game's favor. Live Alive's biggest strength and the brilliance behind its premise isn't just about how good each part of the game is, but also how easily digestible each of the game's scenarios are. They're all relatively short, and by handling the combat like this, it helps give each scenario really great pacing, since it won't take too long and it lets you focus more on whatever makes it unique, may that be the story or its gimmick, so to speak. See, each part of Live Alive, beyond the individual stories and settings, have something that makes each one stand out from the others. Let's take the modern day part of the game for example. Here you'll be playing as Masaru Takahara, a fighter on a journey to become the strongest by brawling with 6 master fighters and learning their techniques. You do this by baiting their techniques out in combat, of which each fighter has 2. Then you have one of my personal favorite sections, Prehistory, where the gimmick is that there's no actual dialogue and characters communicate via pictures and expressions, as well as you making all of your equipment from monster drops. The Distant Future, another one of my personal favorites, is by far the most unique and surprising part of the game for me, because of how few actual fights there are in it. Really, this section is more of a horror game than an RPG, and it's by far the most story-heavy. Now, while I won't go deep into all of them since I really think you should experience them for yourself if you haven't, there is one chapter of the game that does need to be talked about in more detail: the Twilight of Edo, Japan. The story here is simple. A ninja named Oboromaru is tasked with both rescuing a very important prisoner and assassinating the head of a power-hungry clan. What plays out is a stealth RPG where you can off as few or as many people as you see fit. Me, wanting to properly immerse myself into the role of a ninja, decided to go for a pacifist run for my first playthrough, since actual ninja would only kill when necessary. And while I do strongly like this chapter, I was not prepared for its minimal kill run. See, here's the thing. If you go through this without caring too much about your body count, you'll probably be fine and you won't run into many issues. That changes in a pacifist run though, because you're absolutely gonna need a guide after a certain point. Without going into too many details, there's plenty of things you have to do and even not do here that aren't exactly obvious. Heck, while not totally related to this point, something important the game doesn't tell you is that enemies like machines and ghosts, as well as bosses, don't actually count towards your body count. So if you need experience points, you can always fight these guys. You don't have to worry about ruining your run. If it's your first playthrough, there's also definitely going to be plenty of moments where you'll need to backtrack to another part of the castle for one reason or another, which for a lot of people could really make this chapter a bit of a slog. Heck, speaking as somebody who after years of playing through Metroidvanias doesn't have a problem with backtracking, or at least not much of one, I still got annoyed myself because of having to stealth around some of the same guards a few times. Especially this one obnoxious frickin' ninja in one of the attics. Maybe I was just really unlucky with him, but the guy always seems to know your general location, even when you enter the room and are outside of his vision, and he just does not let up. I still enjoyed it overall despite that, and while I can't say it's my least favorite part of the game, I also can't deny that out of every chapter in Live Alive, this one definitely has the most issues for me. By far the best part of the game, and a big reason I love it as much as I do, comes after you've finished all 7 stories. And while I'm sure some of you watching this have heard others say something like this before, it bears repeating that Live Alive is absolutely worth playing for this part of the game alone. The final part of Live Alive is, in no exaggeration, what seals the deal for it being one of the best RPGs on the Switch for me. Honestly, for as much as I really want to talk about it, the brilliance of this part of the game is better understood by experiencing it rather than hearing some dude explain why to you. So while I of course have no frame of reference for what the original version of the game was like, I feel as though I can safely say that every Western fan of RPGs during the 80s really missed out on this gem. I don't know if that's totally apparent from this video by itself, but Live Alive really is one of the best RPGs on the Switch. What it does very well, and honestly, nowadays its premise and execution is still pretty unique. The game is short overall, though. You can easily beat it in 20 hours or less, but while it's not as long as plenty of other RPGs, I think the experience you'll have with it will easily make up for its length. And heck, if you don't want it on Switch, it's actually been ported to both PlayStation and Steam by this point. Now, if only we could get Mother 3 remade and brought over like Live Alive was. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Consider supporting me on Patreon or by becoming a member of the channel by clicking the links down below, and I hope you all have a nice day.